Feeding and maintaining your ants is a crucial part of ant keeping. If you have to regularly feed and clean up after your ants, then guess what? You are succeeding as an ant keeper. For your queen ant or colony to produce waste means that they're growing. Together, we'll look at my feeding and cleaning routine for my colonies and how you too can improve your husbandry as an ant keeper. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Ant Keeper, where I upload every week about all things ant related. If you find yourself enjoying this video, please subscribe. It really helps me out and I really appreciate it. In the wild, as an ant colony develops, they instinctively throw their rubbish away from their chambers. This waste product is called Frass. If you're an ant keeper, you likely would have observed how clean ants really are. They're constantly cleaning themselves, and for good reason. Their home is an ideal breeding ground for harmful bacteria and mold to take over. Since we keep ants in a sealed area, the ants can only move their waste products so far. Over time, regardless of their hard work, mold, frass and uneaten food will build up. This is why we need to step in and help them out by cleaning out their setup. Here is my greenhead ant colony. As you can see, this colony has had a population explosion. Can you see where the colony has been moving all of their waste product to? Today is a day we'll clean up their home and feed them. I use tweezers to carefully pick up the rubbish. It's cleaner than using my hands and safer. Greenhead ants do have a mild but painful sting that I'd rather risk not getting. For water, you can see I use a small test tube setup. This colony is extremely active, and whenever I have a look, there's always at least one worker in there having a drink. For now, this water setup works, as it's simple and doesn't require much maintenance. For feeding, I like to use mealworms for protein and honey for sugar. If you put just a small droplet of honey in, the workers don't get stuck. I personally don't feed live insects to my ants, so I first crush the mealworm, then cut it in half, exposing the juicy protein body for the ants to easily consume. Now I do this twice a week and monitor their well-being in the days in between. If I notice a worker is, say, stuck in the honey, or perhaps the workers have pulled the sand away from the water setup, making it too difficult to reach since greenhead ants can't climb plastic or glass, I'll step in and help them out wherever I can, maybe moving the sand back a bit. For my semicolostor ants, it's a similar process for maintaining and feeding. Here is a greenhead ant queen I found a couple of weeks ago. She's progressing really nicely with a small collection of eggs. With this setup, I simply take the lid off and replace the honey and mealworm. I replace the mealworms twice a week, but the honey once a week. I replace the honey because I've noticed it can get contaminated with the mealworm and slowly develop mold. I've only noticed this once. Since then, I replace the honey every week. I figured it's cheap and it's easy, I use such a small amount of honey, so why not? Here is my pavement colonies. Now I caught these queens a month ago. I caught over a dozen of them. I was finding them literally everywhere. And I've given some away as gifts to friends and family to try and spread awareness of how amazing the industrious ant really is. These colonies have had the first generation of workers arrive and are feeding on honey and mealworms. Feeding in test tube setups is a little bit trickier compared to an outward setup. When you open the test tube setup, the workers naturally want to try and run out and investigate why their home has suddenly changed. To combat this, being prepared is absolute key. The last thing you want is to lose a precious worker. Here are some tips I've developed for those trickier colonies. First, have the food ready on a piece of aluminium foil or baking powder. Having it on a piece of paper has two benefits. First, it's cleaner. When removing the uneaten food source, if it's on a piece of paper, there will be minimal food residue left in the test tube, hence less opportunity for mold growth. Second, if the tweezers touch something sticky, whatever you try to place inside the test tube setup will likely stick to the tweezers, making it very difficult to quickly place food down. I also keep a piece of cotton and an empty container beside me on standby, just in case. Suppose a worker got out, you can gently dab the worker with a piece of cotton. The worker will get temporarily stuck on the cotton, and you will have a short opportunity to quickly put the worker either back in its home in that test tube setup, or in the spare jar if it's more convenient. It's better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. When feeding sugar to smaller ant species like Fardali or the pavement ant, the workers sometimes get stuck in the honey as their little legs can't escape the thick honey. The alternative to this is to use sugar mixed with water, but that seems to go moldy quite quickly, I find. So I use water mixed with honey instead. A ratio of about 1 part water to 5 parts honey, or thereabouts. Using a smear of distilled bottled water or a droplet is enough to thin the honey so the smaller workers don't get stuck. Lastly, over time, the test tube setup may become moldy. You can see this on the moistened end of the cotton. Or perhaps the water reservoir at the end of the test tube has been depleted from over time the ants have been drinking the water. If you notice this, you may need to offer a clean new test tube for the queen and workers to move into. As a rule of thumb to follow, the ants know what they're doing. If you have offered a new test tube, the ants will move in when they need to. To achieve this, you can either sticky tape around the edges of a new and an old test tube, firmly securing the tubes are pressed together, ensuring there aren't any exposed edges of the tape so the ants don't get stuck. Then putting a blanket or a heat source on the new test tube side, and this will encourage ants to move. Alternatively, you could buy something similar to this clever little tool I have. Simply attach the new test tube on one end, and then the old test tube on the other. Either way works. Just remember, it could take a couple of days or a couple of weeks for them to move across, so you have to be patient. If you made it this far, please subscribe if you haven't already. It really makes my day. I love seeing more people joining in on the ant keeping community. I'd love to know from you. Do you have any extra tips or tricks that I didn't mention? Write them in the description below to help out our new ant keepers. If you're a new ant keeper and still have more questions, you can direct message me on Instagram and I'll walk you through any questions you might have. Thank you guys, and I'll see you on the next video. Until then, happy ant keeping.